I'm Captain Kirk.
Fascinating.
I'm a doctor, not a mechanic.
Thank you, love you. Mwah.
Most illogical.
Aye, sir.
Well, that was different. Yep, lousy, but different.
Places, please, and here we go.
Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, Excalbians, chickens and things, to episode 38 of the MuppeTrek podcast. I'm Jarman.
And I'm Steve. We're here to compare, contrast, and confer about our two favorite franchises. And Jarman, what are those?
Those are, of course, the Muppets and Star Trek, and we do one-to-one reviews of the Muppet Show and Star Trek, the original series.
And this week, we have a doozy with Muppet Show special guest Peter Sellers in Star Trek, the original series episode, Metamorphosis.
Yes, it's going to be wonderful.
It is.
So, Steve, tell us about who this guy, Peter Sellers, is.
So Peter Sellers was a British comedian, actor, and singer who first came to fame as a member of the BBC radio show The Goon Squad, which I had never heard of, but I'm sure our British listeners are like, yeah, I grew up with that. And later went on to do big films like Lolita, Doctor Strangelove, and Casino Royale. He eventually did a 5-movie run as Inspector Clouseau in the Pink Panther movie franchise. Not to be confused with the new Pink Panther franchise, which starred fellow season 2 Muppet Show host Steve Martin.
Mm-hmm. Different thing.
Not to be confused. But what does our audience know him from? Probably the Pink Panther is the answer.
Or the other movie. What's it called? You just mentioned it.
Dr. Strangelove,
Yeah.
Casino Royale, Lolita.
Strangelove is pretty well known, and especially if you're a film buff. It's like a must watch. He's pretty amazing in that too.
Well, this week on the Muppet Show, Kermit introduces Peter Sellers, playing a opening song, A Gypsy's Violin, a moody musical number that ends sort of in a fevered pitch. And it has a rare live animal. Not rare. We're seeing more and more live animal.
Yeah, there was a goat.
And this one was a goat. Up next, we get Rolf playing When, a lovely little tune about hating the sounds of nature. Rolf then accompanies Gonzo on the song Memory Lane, a sweet and sort of sad song, strolling down memory lane without a ding-dong thing on my mind. After this, we get the Link Hogthrob getting chiropractically adjusted by like a German doctor, Peter Sellers, with just a brilliant accent.
It rules like a Nazi
twists
doctor.
Twists his body in really unnatural ways. Kermit then comes out to tell the audience that the next act won't make it, and while lamenting, slips into being green.
Yeah.
And goes from sort of performing on a box backstage to being amongst nature as he sings about the beauty of being green.
Now, my girlfriend
which he
asked...
also did in season 1.
Oh, he did in season 1. Okay. Because
he did.
I couldn't remember when he had done that last or first, really.
Finally, we check in with Muppet Labs, where Bunsen Honeydew says that he's invented a teleporter. Kermit comes out furious at him. He pushes Kermit into the teleporter, which teleports him away, and then he brings back Beaker and a gorilla, and then sends them away, and then brings back Kermit and a gorilla. It gets really absurd. Fozzie does the final introduction, asking Peter Sellers to keep it short, performing with an assortment of Civil War vets, kind of. Peter Sellers plays cigarettes and whiskey and Wild Wild Women. And I don't know why, but this may be my favorite musical number that I completely forgot about.
Oh, it was great and really inappropriate for children audiences.
So inappropriate for children, but just well sung and performed, and the drive, the boom, boom, you could feel it in the number.
It felt like a sea shanty, which were very popular recently on TikTok, like one of those sea shanty kind of songs. Yeah. And like also just his accent, he did like a Southern American accent, and it sounded fantastic. And he's
fantastic.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Backstage this week, the backstage plot centers on the fact that Dr. Bunsen Honeydew has created teleportation and just drives Kermit absolutely insane. We do get a kind of nice visit with Peter in his dressing room with Kermit, where Peter is wearing Viking horns and says he's impersonating Queen Victoria.
It was very surreal.
And he once had a real self, but he had it surgically removed.
I love that line.
By playing chickens vigorously. It's very all insane. Then Gonzo appears. Gonzo disappears. A bomb appears. Peter Sellers disappears, and Kermit is left there to blow up. Kermit, on the edge of losing it, tells when Fozzie comes out and tells him that the next act got murdered, basically, during duck hunting season.
Pretty terrible.
Before then that final number. Kermit thanks Peter. Peter and a bunch of people teleport on and off stage. And that is what we call the Muppet Show. Jarman, what did you think of this week's episode with Peter Sellers?
I think he could be a Muppet. Like, he just blends right in. His songs were so wacky and out there, and his things he said are so strange. Like, he's even odder than Gonzo, and he's just a wacko, and I loved it. And he had great songs and great costumes, and he would stare into the Muppets' eyes like they were a living creature, and you were right there with him.
And Link Hogthrob it was better than any talk spot as far as the way that he was interacting with the puppet and going back to check in with the puppet.
It's actually okay. I can't do the accent now. It's like, that feel okay? And he's like,
yes.
This is very
it's
good
almost
for you.
Marvin the Martian, kind of. Sort of.
It was like, I just feel like some cartoon Nazi doctor from like the Looney Tunes. Oh, but man. Yeah. It was just, even though
it kind of reminded me of Mel Brooks's cameo in the first Muppet movie.
Oh, did he play like
a little bit? Remember, he played the like weird German doctor who tries to wipe Kermit's memory with
vaguely. Yes, I do.
Oh man, we'll review that at some point.
We will. But I will say, like, this, even though there wasn't a lot of through line plot going on, it just felt like a fun ride, and none of it was boring. I really, really enjoyed this episode.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about this episode because I agree. Peter Sellers was just a great host. The music was good. None of the songs dragged on too long. But at the same time, this episode was missing any of the staples that we would come to expect.
That's true.
If anything, this kind of felt like an early season 1 episode.
There was no news blast. There was no veterinary hospital.
No At the Dance. No Pigs in Space.
Which personally, I'm fine with not having, one or some of them, but it's strange they didn't have any of them. That's true.
Right. And in that way, I think it feels like one of those early experimental episodes from season 1 when they didn't quite know what to do.
Yeah. And funny results. But yeah, there wasn't
funny results.
Cohesive.
This week it worked, but I think only because Peter Sellers.
And no Fozzie doing a stand-up act either.
No. Closest we got were the few bits with Kermit and him doing the introduction.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, unusual in that sense, but really fun. And once you guys get Disney Plus in March, you can watch this. Please make this one of your top, along with Peter Ustinov.
I think, cigarettes. Like, I still have cigarettes and whiskey stuck in my head.
When he says cigarettes, weird. How do you say it?
Cigarettes and whiskey
and wild women.
Wild women.
It was really fun.
Yeah. I got stuck in my head. So, music this week, A Gypsy's Violin by humorist, writer, and radio performer Abe Burrows. He became known as Hollywood's script doctor, basically, to the point where for decades, Get Me an Abe Burrows was apparently code for somebody who needed a script reworked so heavy.
Kind of like what Carrie Fisher did later on in her career, right?
Right. Get Me an Abe Burrows.
Gotcha.
The song When, this is another Abe Burrows song. His son is James Burrows, a TV director known for shows such as Laverne and Shirley, Night Court, Wings, Frasier, Friends, Third Rock from the Sun, 2.5 Men, and Two Broke Girls.
Oh, wow. Up to that recently.
Yeah. Memory Lane, another Abe Burrows song.
Jeez.
He had his own radio show, but his sponsor, Lambert Pharmaceuticals, they were the then makers of Listerine, who were pushing a new toothpaste. And then they got mad at Abe because his audience wasn't buying any toothpaste.
What?
Like, his sponsors got mad with him because they really invested in him, and then he didn't sell toothpaste. Being Green, this is the second time this was performed, as I mentioned. The first time was in season 1 for the Pete Ustinov episode. The last Pete, and I think the last time maybe very similar episodes in that really the host carried, and the host could have been a Muppet.
That's true. That's weird.
And they both featured Easy Being Green. That's crazy.
And that first season episode with him, that was the first time that song was performed, or was it on a talk show before?
No, I think it had either been on talk shows, probably the Muppet Show at some point, if I had to guess. I could look it up, but I'm not going to. Cigarettes and Whiskey by Tim Spencer of country group Sons of the Pioneers. He was a founding member along with Roy Rogers, who you know.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, Cigarettes and Whiskey.
Happy trails to you. That's Roy Rogers' song, I think.
So, Jeremy, what did you think was the best Muppeteering moment this week?
All right, so this is a little bit of a inside thing into what's going on right now. I'm currently filming a short film very carefully during the pandemic, and just knowing how difficult it is to do those teleportations so perfectly, even though it's not necessarily Muppeteering, it's just the craft of the show was done very well. The fact that all those disappearing teleports look so nice, and this is before any kind of CGI stuff, mind you. So they had to do that all with in-camera tricks, and people had to stay very still. You move them up and out, and then you continue, and it looks pretty seamless throughout. So I was just as a filmmaker, very impressed with that. That was pretty awesome.
Oh, yeah, I mean, Jim was always such a huge proponent of that the old tricks were the good tricks.
They really are.
And when done well, they lived up to a lot of the newer techniques.
Mm-hmm. Done well is the key there, yeah.
Right, done well. My favorite, I've got two kind of, and one of it is just, I like the show, but I can't think of a lot of times where I have like a burst out loud laughter moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one this episode, and it was right in that first musical number, Gypsy's Violin. Pete Ustinov comes out and introduces this Gypsy character, and he goes, "Do you all have any requests?" And the first Muppet goes, "Yeah, but you are gonna play anyway."
I didn't hear that.
I burst out laughing. Like it caught me off guard because there's not that much hard wit in the Muppet.
I don't know why, but my humor
was really good.
Did the same thing with that when he said, "I had myself surgically removed" or whatever. That would just make me crack up too. I laughed out loud.
Surgically removed. And then my other favorite was just one of those camera tricks that you're talking about, Gonzo in Memory Lane, where he does the kind of like, he walks across stage kind of, but then he goes under the camera so you can't see him, and he walks across frame again.
Oh yeah, I
and then
see
finally
that.
In the last one, he comes across and pushes Rolf and his piano across frame.
I did see that. That was
and
great.
It was just clean and cute and filled that musical interlude in a way that if he had just danced would have been kind of lame in that long of
That's true.
a shot. So by filling it with this bit, it just made it great.
Those are some great moments.
Jarman, tell us about this week's episode of Star Trek: The Original Series.
All right, so this week we have the episode Metamorphosis, which is pretty important in Star Trek canon, whether you like the episode or not. All right, so first we have a very agitated and ornery Federation Commissioner, Nancy Hedford, who's yelling at everyone. She's being taken by shuttlecraft to the Enterprise to be treated for Sukaro's disease, which is a very rare and deadly disease. But
1 in billions, really.
I know. I should have been vaccinated for this. But it can easily be treated once she's on board the Enterprise. They just need to get her there pretty quickly. So on the shuttlecraft are Kirk, Bones, and Spock, and of course, Commissioner Hedford. Suddenly, they are overtaken in space by some kind of moving energy field, and it forces them down to a nearby planetoid and makes their ship completely inoperable. Like, just turns off all the electronics. Once they land safely, they are greeted by a very excited man. Hello! He won't exactly
He like runs from across
Yes.
from across the world to find them.
Exactly. Somebody's here. He's very friendly, very excited to meet them, but he won't tell them about what's going on or where he came from until they come back to his house. He's like, we got all the time in the world. Come on back. But he did say he was marooned there. So eventually, once they're back at his house, Kirk gets tired of waiting for a proper explanation, and he sees that Commissioner Hedford is getting worse. So he forces the man to explain himself, and they find out that he's the long-lost Zefram Cochrane, who is thought to have disappeared in space 150 years ago. And he was the creator of warp flight, very famous, and once he aged a lot and was about to die, he wanted to go out and die in space. But when he was out in space, about to die, this planetoid sent out that weird energy being and saved him, brought him back to health, and also brought him back to like 35 years old. And he's been stuck there for 150 years, trapped on the planet with this entity, which he now calls the Companion. And Steve knows Zefram Cochrane very well because I think you'd recorded an episode of the Temporal Trek podcast all about him in a movie, right?
Yeah, that's right. I was on the Halloween episode of the Temporal Trek podcast that hasn't come out yet.
Yes. There's a lot of production that goes
I'm
out.
Still very excited
In that podcast.
Still very excited.
Check it out, people.
Not only that. So I don't know what happened, but I was supposed to show up, and I get there and they were already recording.
No.
So it's probably going to be like a 3-hour episode.
Probably.
Check it out. We get into Zefram Cochrane real hard.
And we'll talk more about him towards the trivia section here. All right. So he's grown to have affection for the Companion as well. But he complained to the Companion that he would die of boredom and loneliness. So that's why the Companion pulled down the shuttlecraft with Kirk and the crew on it so they could be his friends and he wouldn't die. Spock and Bones find a way to possibly disable the entity by shorting it out because they can tell it's made of electricity partially. It doesn't work, and it just basically has the entity getting pissed off and beating them up. So Kirk then decides that he'll try to communicate with the entities. He should have tried that first, but, whatever. By using a modified version of the Universal Translator. And they do so, and they find out that the companion, talking through a feminine voice through their translator, loves Cochrane and wants him to stay with her and be happy forever. And Kirk tries to logic her out of it by saying that Cochrane will cease to be if he doesn't have his freedom, because humans...
It was almost like when he tries to trick a computer. It was so close to when he tries to trick a computer.
He tried to talk it to death, not realizing it wasn't a computer. But he finally convinced her that she can never truly love Cochrane since she isn't human, and that she should let them all go. And so meanwhile, Commissioner Hedford, her condition's worsening. She's about to die, but she hears that Cochrane is enraged that he finds out the companion was female and that it loved him, and he's grossed out. He thinks it's somehow wrong that some kind of alien entity loves him and wants to be his lover. And Hedford's distraught by this because she's never known love, and she can't believe Cochrane would just have it and throw it away. I mean, how terrible that is. And thus, a perfect situation is born. The companion needs to be human to understand love, and Hedford has never been loved and is envious of it. So the companion takes partial control of Hedford's body, and they cohabitate in her body, and saves her life in the process. But now she, as a consequence, she no longer has her powers as this entity, and she'll live out a normal life. And she can't keep Cochrane alive forever either. He'll start to age regularly as well. But Cochrane is so impressed with her sacrifice for him that she decides that he loves her after all, and decides to stay with her on the planet. For if she leaves the planet too long, she would die immediately, apparently. So Kirk tries to convince him to go with him to see the new world 150 years in Cochrane's future, but Cochrane refuses and tells Kirk and the crew not to tell anyone that they found him there so that no one will find out Cochrane's still alive. So that is the episode Metamorphosis. What did you think about it, Steve?
The episode itself, I agree. It was cool to see. I knew that Zefram Cochrane was in one of these episodes somewhere because I had read it at some point when we were doing our review for First Contact, maybe.
Gotcha.
But I didn't know it was this one. So it was kind of nice to have that surprise that, this is the one. And it was cool to see something I had more context to, because besides maybe Khan from Space Seed, I don't know if I have in context to any of these other things we're going to see. So it was nice to have a hook finally. Yeah,
there's very little that connects to other episodes from the original series.
I thought the visual of the entity and the way that the planet was made up was maybe one of their most successful set decorations.
Interesting.
Like in the show thus far, I was really impressed for whatever reason with this specific one. Things that were maybe rough. It is so strong. It was so rare for them to show a strong female guest character on Star Trek. They do occur, but it's mostly women there to like swoon over Kirk in some way.
Yep.
And for her to start so strong, she was such a great, strong opening character. Like her just buffooning Bones. It was just great. It was just great. But then for her to literally fall to pieces as she got sick, and then with the love thing.
Yeah.
Took all of that and was like, wow, they undid it all. Good job, guys. You made a great, strong female character, and then you wiped her away with femininity.
I just want love. I want to be loved.
God, shut up. But she was so good up front that it made it that much more disappointing when she fell off.
That's true. I mean, she was kind of like frustratingly angry, but she was also like really smart and really accomplished, so she was,
and you know why they had to get her back? Because she was going to go negotiate a war.
And then at the end of the episode, Kirk even says, well, what are we going to do now with the Regis 5 and their war? We'll find some other woman to take care of it. That's what he said. It was terrible.
That was my other issue. A woman had to die to make the plot happen.
Yeah.
And at the end, they flippantly muse about preventing a major war.
Mm-hmm. It is out of character for them.
What? This is weird.
I will say I really like the actor Cochrane. I thought he was really good and very gentle performance, which is weird from like a male in the 60s,
Oh, yeah.
He was very sensitive.
I mean, some of their guests chew.
Oh, yeah. And they're always like, hey, Garuff, talk like this because I'm a man in the 60s. It's like,
that's right.
He was just nice and sweet and innocent, kind of. It was interesting. But yeah, I also would say that it's strangely parallels issues of trans rights, these days, because we've seen it on screen many times. You might have seen it in person. When you see a man find out that a woman that he's into is actually a trans woman, and suddenly this bigotry and disgust pops its ugly head, and it's like you still fell for this person, like just because now you found out that they're trans,
Right.
that shouldn't matter.
Game.
Crying game, exactly. And so the same thing in this was basically he finds out this thing that loves him is actually an alien that's actually in love with him. It's kind of similar feeling there, that kind of bigotry. And even
And not
Spock
only
points
that,
it
he
out
turns
too.
himself into the victim.
Yeah, she took
Like,
advantage
how
of me.
could I be used like that? Yeah.
But Spock even says that he's like, that attitude is so outdated, basically, is what he was saying. He's like, fascinating how he's a bigot, like that. It was just really interesting.
Something else that I liked this episode that I'm going to start looking for.
Uh-huh.
So in one of the Star Trek movies, there is an implication that Scotty and Uhura are in a romantic entanglement.
Right.
I can't remember which one it is. I think it's 4 or maybe 5.
I forgot too. One of those. Yeah.
But she like brings him spaceships and he calls her Lassie and they like caress cheeks.
Mm-hmm. It was
and they
odd.
never talk about it again. So I realized we don't get to see them interact often. So now I'm going to watch anytime we get to see them actually interact to see if there's like sexual tension.
It's a good idea.
And they had a scene together in this episode.
And
so
it was
I
a
watched
little
it hard and maybe, but it was more testy than anything.
And it was a little friendly, though. It wasn't like it wasn't totally professional. It was like a little casual in their conversation. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You're right.
So I've decided that for the rest of the original series, I'm going to watch to see if there was any sign that these two were going to hook up.
Oh, now I am too. That's fascinating. Because then
Maybe this is the long lost romance that no one saw coming, and we all just underwrote it.
Because of course in the JJ movies they push Spock and Uhura being the thing, which I thought was odd, but okay, it worked.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, we ready for some trivia?
Damn right.
Some of it is very related to what you said about the set, which I thought was really cool.
Ooh.
So what's interesting about the set is that that first shot where we see Cochrane running to the crew from far away, they had to do that because it was actually a fairly small set. They used a wide angle lens to make it look like he was farther away through like camera tricks. And they had to put these like rocks on the edges of the frame so you couldn't tell that it was the literal edge of the set. And apparently you can still see a little bit of the black at the top of the frame where the set ends at one of the shots, but I didn't get to see that.
Huh.
But also the set was so small that they had to film all of the scenes with Cochrane and the companion, they were standing across from each other, and then completely redress the set once those scenes were all filmed to have Cochrane's house for the flip side of the shot. So it was the same exact space, but they just they basically just redressed it and then shot again. So there wasn't actually a place they could walk from the house to that area, which is fascinating. What's cool is that the Commissioner Hedford, was portrayed by Eleanor Donahue, who was known for the 1950s sitcom Father Knows Best. And she played actresses Jane Wyatt's daughter. And on the next episode we're going to watch, Jane Wyatt guest stars playing Spock's mother, Amanda, which is interesting. So they had 2 Father Knows Best characters on 2 episodes in a row.
Back to back.
Yeah. And a number of the scenes had to be reshot after flaws were found in the film stock during post-production. So the reshoot involved calling back actors and rebuilding sets, which had already been struck. And Donahue had gotten pneumonia right before these reshoots and lost 10 pounds, which is a lot on her already tiny frame. So that first shot where she's wearing a scarf for some reason, it's because they're trying to cover up her neck and show where she looks super skinny and like sickly. But anyways, I thought that was fascinating behind the scenes stuff there. So we got any Trek connections here? Trek Muppet connections?
Oh boy. Simon Pegg, who played Scotty in the rebooted Kelvin timeline Star Trek universe, won many awards for his film Shaun of the Dead, including the Peter Sellers Award for Comedy.
Oh.
Okay, so there was a French show, like a play called L'Idiot. Literally, it's L'Idiot.
Interesting.
Which got an English adaptation called A Shot in the Dark, which ran on Broadway and had William Shatner in it.
Ah, okay.
Then they took the Broadway play and they tried to adapt it into a movie. But they took William Shatner's character and they changed it to Inspector Clouseau and put Peter Sellers in it and made it like a Pink Panther movie.
Was it an actual Pink Panther movie or just like a knockoff Pink Panther movie?
They took this existing script and they changed it into a Pink Panther film.
That's hilarious.
And the show was one that Shatner was in on Broadway.
That's quite the connection.
Eleanor Donahue, who you played Nancy Hedford, as you mentioned, Also appeared on an episode of The Love Boat.
Of course.
And as I established, everybody, including many, many Muppet Show guest hosts, was on The Love Boat.
Everyone was on the Love Boat.
Everybody.
I was on the Love Boat.
So yeah, those are my Trek connections this week.
That was amazing. So some similarities between these episodes, which are exactly the same. I have that both have someone disappearing and reappearing, the teleporting Muppets, and the disappearing and appearing companion creature.
Okay,
Yeah,
I like that.
It's loose, but
Both Kirk and Kermit are plagued by things they don't understand. Zefram Cochrane and the Entity, and people teleporting around.
That makes sense. Yeah. Both have an entity who has no true self. Sellers backstage when he says he removed his true self surgically, and the companion who is just energy.
All right, fair. The Entity treats Zefram like a toy, quote unquote, just like Peter Sellers treats Link Hogthrob like a Stretch Armstrong doll.
I almost did that one, actually. That's amazing. Oh, right. What's that noise? Oh my God.
Transporter malfunction. Transporter malfunction.
All right, it's the part of the show where we transport one character from one of the episodes to the other episode and vice versa. So what do you have for us, Steve?
This week, Trek to Muppets, I've got the Entity coming over and being the thing that scares Kermit repeatedly backstage.
I need Kermit to live. I have Peter Sellers coming over to play the companion, because if he was the companion, Cochrane would never have been bored, and he would have been happy to stay there for eternity.
Okay, that's good. From Muppets to Trek, I've got Gonzo coming over, because he is always so sad and lonely. I think being trapped on an alien planet loved by an entity for all eternity would literally be his best day.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if he loves having chickens love him, he'll love having an entity love him. That's great.
Right. I just think that Gonzo would just fit this scenario so well.
That makes a lot of sense. I had a little loose one here. Cochrane as Kermit. He would come over and take over as Kermit because he would never be bored again with all the hijinks of the Muppets and would be overjoyed at even the bad things happening. He wouldn't get pissed off like Kermit. He'd just be like, I have people again, company.
Right. That sweet innocence.
Exactly. So I think that brings us to the end of episode 38 of the MuppeTrek podcast.
That's right. Join us next time for the Muppet Show with special guest Elton John.
And original series episode, Journey to Babel.
So from the lovers, the dreamers, and us.
Live long and prosper, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the MuppeTrek podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media on Facebook and Twitter.
Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform.
This podcast has been brought to you by A Play on Nerds.